Singularity.
My name is Nicola, and you're watching Singularity FM, the place where we interview the future. If you guys enjoy this podcast, you can show your support by either writing a brief review on iTunes or by simply becoming a patron via interviewthefuture.com. My guest today is Jamelle Lindo. Jamelle is an emotional intelligence expert, executive coach, and keynote speaker. I invited him to guide us through a topic few discuss on technology podcasts today. And namely, that topic is emotional intelligence in the age of AI. So, welcome to Singularity FM, Jamel.
Thank you so much for having me, Nick.
Jamel, can you please introduce yourself in your own words? Hopefully, in a sentence or two. Who is Jamel Lindo?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So I think that you basically have it covered. Jamelle Lindo, I am an emotional intelligence leadership coach, which is really just a fancy way of saying I help leaders become better leaders by improving their people skills, and that's my passion. That's what I do, and that's what I love.
Wonderful. And maybe we should start by you sharing how and why you decided to study emotional intelligence. What's the story behind your motivation?
That's a great question. So I didn't, wake up one day and say, "Oh my goodness, I want to study these things that we largely try to avoid in our lives," right? Emotions. That's really not the way that it happened for me. I would say that it got into me before I got into it. And what that means is I was a young kid, I just finished high school, and I was really struggling a lot with anxiety, social anxiety, all of these kinds of emotions. And the reason why I started this process was for me to become a better version of myself. I wanted to become a more confident version of myself. And I started to read on the topic, learn a little bit more about the topic, and started this journey of self awareness. And that's really the birthplace of this entire thing. It wouldn't be for another 10 years or so when I entered into my first leadership role where I started to see the connection between some of this work that I was doing on myself, emotional intelligence, self awareness, and being an effective leader. And that was kind of the birthplace of saying, okay, this is a critical component of being an effective leader. Let me now begin to take this lens. And so again, it would be another 10 years after that. I spent 10 years in the corporate space where I would kind of turn all of that knowledge and information and experience and a variety of different leadership roles into what I do now to support leaders in the work that they do.
And that was kind of but was there any specific story or episode that really kind of pushed you that where I don't know, you fell short of your expectations or those of the people around you, perhaps, and you felt the need because we are creatures of habit and comfort, I think. And therefore, usually there has to be some kind of a trigger before we become even aware that we need to do something in our life. So, was there, and I'm fishing here a little bit, but was there an episode perhaps that, or something that happened specifically, like a story?
Fish away. There were many episodes. And to do a little bit of a deeper dive into what I just shared with you to give you more context, I think that we can all relate to the experience of being a really insecure human being. I think that largely most of us struggle with that. And so going through high school for me, it was a major struggle. And you wouldn't have noticed this looking from the outside in, right? But on the inside out, I knew that what I was experiencing internally. And it was the kind of social anxiety that was quite honestly, it was numbing. It was paralyzing. I remember walking through hallways and seeing
Wow.
people and feeling that sensation deep in my belly, that grinding feeling because I
Wow.
was so nervous, because I was so anxious. I was a really talented athlete in high school, both with football and basketball, and I was able to make the senior teams in my junior year. But I struggled so much with anxiety that, for example, on the basketball court, I remember intentionally not making myself available to get the ball because I was so afraid of missing the shot. And so here you have this young talented athlete who's so fixated, so obsessed with how other people are going to see him, other people are going to see me, that I'm removing myself from the opportunity to even take the shot. And there's a lot of symbolism there. And I struggled with this and I had no answers, right? I mean, I grew up extremely, extremely religious and I took a lot of great value away from that. But my religion didn't tell me about what I was feeling and why I was feeling it. I had countless leaders in my life, from coaches to counselors to teachers, etc. No one ever talked about this idea of emotions and what you're feeling and what you're thinking. And so I just found myself really confused and struggling with how to manage myself in an appropriate way. And it wasn't until my this was after high school, so I graduated, I was working at Best Buy at the time, and a friend of mine, when I entered in to do my shift for that day, he recommended this book. And he said, "You know what, Jamal, I think you should read this. It really changed my life." And I said, "Okay, all right. Well, I'll give it a go." And the book, by the way, is the Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle.
Oh, wow,
That book.
wonderful.
Yeah, incredible book. And so I read it and I got to this one line that literally changed my life forever and essentially set me up to be where I am today, having this conversation with you right now, you and your audience. And the line that I read is, "You are not your thoughts." And it hit me like a ton of bricks for a number of different reasons. Number one, I had never considered the possibility that maybe the things that I'm thinking are not actually who I am. And I'm sure that we can all relate to these really negative stories and things that we tell ourselves about ourselves in our own minds. It's that narrative that really never stops. It's that soundtrack that's always playing. And I'd never considered that maybe that soundtrack was not an accurate representation of who I actually was. Huge sigh of relief. Second thing that I recognized is that I could actually begin to observe that soundtrack, that I could pay attention to these thoughts and stories in my mind, become aware of them, and even influence them. And to me, that was groundbreaking, right? Because what it means is I don't have to just be a victim to my own thoughts and to my own emotions, but I can engage in that process and direct it in some way. And this, of course, is self-leadership. This is where the journey of self-leadership and understanding leadership in general begins. You can't lead someone else if you can't lead yourself. And so as I started to pay attention to what it was that I was thinking, I realized that those thoughts and stories were then generating these emotions within me. These emotions of insecurity, of fear, of panic, of anxiety were all being generated because of me. And so, on one end, you could say, well, that's an incredibly daunting thought, right? That the entirety of the responsibility of my experience lands on me. But then on the other side, you can say, well, this is incredibly liberating because something that I thought was happening outside of me and happening to me, I'm realizing that I'm doing and I control me so I can change that experience. And that was really the route that I took, is how do I begin to influence and change this experience? And so over the course of the next several years, I really kind of steeped myself in the practice of, self-awareness and emotional intelligence and all of these kinds of things. And by the way, this is probably 20 years ago now, way before all of this stuff was popular. So when I discovered it, I thought, oh my goodness, I found the secret to life. And so what do we do when we think we found the secret to life? We try to run out and tell everybody else and convert everybody else. But I looked crazy because nobody even knew at the time really what, mindfulness, self-awareness, emotional intelligence, all of that stuff even was. It wasn't trendy yet. And so it kind of just isolated me. And so what I told myself was, you know what, Jamel, stop talking about it, start being about it, and just practice. And if at some point, someone has an interest or they want to know more, they'll ask. And that'll be your invitation to then begin to share. And that's essentially what happened and where I started that process. So this is a pretty long story. So if you have questions about some of that, feel free to ask. If you want me to continue from there into how it spun into what I'm doing now, feel free to ask as well. One thing that I'll add to that is when I discovered this, I felt a deep sense of disappointment. in society because I had gone to school and I
Right.
had been educated on all of these things. If you remember that big, giant, ugly scientific calculator with all of those weird symbols on it, and what does it do? It teaches you how to create a curved line, that little parabola, right?
Sinus
Like
and cosinus and all kinds of functions.
exactly. I did all of that. I've never, to this day, created a parabola in my regular adult life ever. Okay, I've never needed to create that curved line, but I have struggled with emotion, and so the disappointment came from why was I not taught how to deal with something that is so fundamental to being human?
Hmm.
But I was taught all of these other things. And I think that that's kind of what created the fire in me to kind of have
Hmm.
this desire to share this information because I feel like we're set up for failure. It's like we don't talk about emotions at all, but then it's like go out there and be successful. And undoubtedly, you're going to encounter your own emotions and the emotions of others. We have no tools to handle what comes with any of that, but we're kind of expected to be able to get it right. And that was tough for me.
Right. But the good news here is that it seems to me that because you discovered this lack, this gap, this vacuum, this void, you also discovered your mission. You discovered your purpose, which is to fill it, to provide education, to provide coaching and training about that. So, and that's basically how we all discover our calling. We discover a lack, an emptiness, or a void, or a vacuum of some sort, and we feel like we can contribute towards filling that in a positive manner. And there we go. Then 20 years later, we are talking about Jamelle Lindo being, an emotional intelligence expert, an executive coach, and a keynote speaker on the topic, just because of the fact that you discovered this lack first in yourself. Then you looked around it and you discovered that lack in our society. And eventually you started filling the holes in both of those places and sharing the process with those who are willing to listen, which is wonderful, and it works with many people and many great scientists. And that's why I'm so persistent about trying to dig into the, if you call, story of origin, if you will, to most people on my podcast, because most people do have such a story, and just like in your case, it's very emotional and relatable. So thank you for that. um, but let's say I wasn't such an athlete in high school and I didn't struggle as much as you did with confidence, didn't have the same issues. So here I am today, living my life, doing what I do. Why should I care about emotional intelligence if I don't feel I have these struggles that you did?
Okay. That's a fantastic question. Oftentimes, when I meet with leaders for the first time, this is what's on their mind. Why should I care? Why is this something that I should invest my energy in? The first thing that I always say is if you can't find a reason to care, if you can't find a reason why this matters to you, then you shouldn't care. And I always start there because at the end of the day, this is about a process of self-discovery, a process of learning and a process of development, which is going to take a certain amount of effort and energy if you were to get any real result or benefit from it. And so, if I'm working with someone and we can't find something in the scope of emotional intelligence that they actually care about, I know that it's not the right time or the right opportunity for that person. So, the next question naturally becomes how do I then identify, right? If it is something that I care about. And typically, when it comes to human beings, we don't really change when everything is all good, right? Like, we need to come to some sort of challenge, we need to come to some sort of difficulty. And then it's in the struggle of that difficulty and the
Pain is
impact.
usually the greatest motivator, right?
Absolutely. 100%. And it's unfortunate, right? I wish I could learn some things with a lot less pain, right? But I'm super stubborn. So I need more pain than the average person to start learning. And so the real question to ask here, Nick, is what are the friction points that I experience? What are the ways in which my success is being impeded? in relation to others, and that can be communication, it could be in the way that we build relationships, it could be in the way that we respond to others, how they respond to us. Where's the friction? Am I rubbing people the wrong way? I'm not building deep enough relationships. Am I holding back on what I know that I need to say but don't say? Do I need to be more assertive? Do I need to listen more? Take a bit of a step back? Do I need to ask more questions to understand the view and perspective of someone else? In what ways are some of the things that I just mentioned creating friction for me? Now, I'll give you a practical example. I get an opportunity to work with leaders in many different industries. And one of those industries is the legal field. Now, you wouldn't imagine, right, that the legal field would really care much for emotions or emotional intelligence, but emotions affect every field. It affects anything where there are feeling human beings, right? And so it affects everything. But they're not going to think about that necessarily as a step one. So, why does a lawyer care about emotional intelligence? I've worked with several lawyers actually over the course of the last few years, and they typically come to me when they hit a ceiling of some sort. And so these are some of the most hardworking people on the planet, and the ceiling that they might hit comes from their effort to make partner at their firm. Now, to make partner, you're becoming, they don't call it this, but you're essentially becoming a leader in that firm. And because you're becoming a leader, you have a lot more influence on others. And there's a certain standard. You need to be in a certain place when it comes to your people skills. And so I've worked with many lawyers now, probably three or four that made the transition where they weren't able to move forward unless they resolved some of these people challenges that they were experiencing. And so for them, what they care about and what their goal is to transition into partnership, but they don't have the people skill set to be able to do that. They've hit a ceiling. And so they come to it to say, okay, let me develop these skills so that I can grow myself and continue to grow my career. That's what they care about. Outside of that, most leaders want to become better leaders. And leadership fundamentally is about our ability to influence ourselves and to influence others. So there's something missing in their ability to influence others. Now, in the model that I use, there are 15 different skills that fall
Before
into,
we get there, let me
yes,
just ask you, do you have anyone? Because most of my audience is not from the legal profession. Most of my people are highly tech sophisticated people in the IT industry, software engineers, other engineers, and generally uh, tech leaders. Have you had someone from those kind of industries?
absolutely. We just did some incredible work at the top of the year with an engineering firm. And same idea. These are partners of the engineering firm who are, therefore, leaders. And so, with any skill set where it's highly technical, legal field, medical field, engineering, the emphasis and the focus is on your technical expertise. It's on what you know. And because we become hyper focused on those things, and the industry tends to focus us on those things, rightfully so. What falls in the periphery are all of those people skills. How do I interact with people? How do I relate with people? How do I influence people? All the things that we had already spoken about. And so engineers come at this from a very unique angle where it's never really been a focal point. But at some point in their career, they start to feel the friction of not having the emotional intelligence or people skills or empathy, and that's where they suddenly realize I've got to develop and expand myself as a person, and it's not just about my technical expertise. There's another component here, especially if I want to grow and develop as a leader.
Yeah, it seems to me that what you're saying is whether you're talking about lawyers or engineers or what have you, people hit a point where they realize that their limits are not due to their technical or expertise limitations, but due to their limitations with other people.
That's right. Marshall Goldsmith says, "What got you here won't get you there." And so the technical expertise gets us to a certain point, and it got us here, but it won't get us there. We need a new skill set for that.
Very cool. So let's say I have hit that kind of realization. Then how do we define emotional intelligence? And where do I even begin to develop and cultivate it? What are
That's
the
a
first steps for someone who is completely ignorant? You know a lot about emotional intelligence and maybe a little bit about AI and technology in general, and we'll talk about that later. I'm the other way around. I know very little bit about emotional intelligence and a little bit more about AI and technology in general. So, where does someone like me even begin?
right. So that's a fantastic question. The starting point for emotional intelligence is always, always, always with self awareness. It starts with our ability to be able to see ourselves clearly. Now, when I told that story earlier, really what I was saying is that I started to become self aware. I developed this capacity to look inside myself at what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling, which then allowed me to start to make the connection between what I'm thinking and what I'm feeling and what I'm doing. These things are intimately connected. My thoughts and my emotions influence the action that I take. There is no action that anyone will ever take that is not in alignment with an internal experience that they had first, regardless of what that action is. So we're kind of going into the world now of behavioral science. So the first thing is, what's actually happening inside me? What is my capacity to be able to see myself? How aware am I of the things that I do really well and the things that I don't do really well? And so if you ask yourself that question and you struggle with either the strength side or the challenges side, that's going to be a pretty good clue that you've got to spend a little bit more time developing your self-awareness, your capacity to be able to see yourself. Now, how do we develop self-awareness is probably the next natural question. How do I get better at seeing myself? What are the tools? What are the resources? Normally, I start people with a simple reflection technique where you just for 30 days evaluate two emotional triggers per day. And you write it down, right? In a reflective mode, and you identify what was the trigger, so what was the thing that happened, what were the thoughts and stories I told myself, and what were the emotions that came up for me. Now, I've seen this countless times. If I were to do that exercise with you or with any of your viewers, what we would naturally find is that the average person struggles to describe and to identify emotion. The average person's emotional vocabulary is very low because we don't focus on it.
Mhm.
And so, just by learning how to label what it is that we're feeling, and building out that vocabulary, right, we can then become far more articulate about our experiences. We can interpret our experiences with much more depth, and we can use that information within our emotions. There is information to make more informed decisions. Now, you might be asking or wondering, well, what information is in my emotions? Why should I pay attention to that? Well, number one, your emotions are a reflection of what you value, your core values, right? Things like integrity, respect, honor, loyalty, all of those things are core values, okay? They're also a reflection of your subjective experience because how you feel might not be in alignment with exactly what's happening. Sometimes it will be, sometimes it won't be. But it's always a reflection of how you're interpreting something, what is true for you. That's going to be important to know, particularly when what you're observing or experiencing is not objectively true. We got to be able to make that alignment, right? So we have that part of it, which is our experience, right? So you have what you value, you have what you experience, and then most importantly, you have what you need. Your emotions are a reflection of your needs. And so if we ignore our emotions, it means we're also ignoring our needs. And this is where burnout comes in, this is where resentment comes in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we really start with that building block of self awareness. And then from there, when we start developing those skills, that ability to look inward over time, it extends outwards into the other various EQ skills. And I'll pause there. I can go into more detail with the skills, but I'm curious maybe you wanted some more insight on some of that
Yeah,
stuff.
to me, the fascinating part is that this reminds me so much to the inscription above the doorway or the entry of the Temple of Delphi, which reads, Know thyself. And of course, my
Yes.
favorite guy, Socrates, was all about that, know thyself. So I can really relate to that, and that makes me very happy. But I wonder, so, going back to the definition, can you please help us define what emotional intelligence is? And is there any, so you gave us like some tips and ideas on how we can start cultivating it, but is there any way like we can measure or assess where we're at in that journey? How good or how bad we are at, whether as individuals, whether as organizations?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's start with the definition, and I'll give you a variety of definitions that you can play with. And yourself and your audience can pick the one that resonates most with you because it's a very broad topic. Okay.
Hmm.
So, what is emotional intelligence? Fundamentally, emotional intelligence refers to your ability to recognize and manage your own emotions as well as the emotions of others. So, another way of saying that is when it comes to emotions, this is about your ability to manage them in a smart way, both your own as well as the emotions of others. Now, if we take that down to its base level, right, we can also say that it's people skills. You're a person, I'm a person. How do we deal with and manage that on a day to day? Now, let's pivot a little bit, right? That gets us a little bit closer, but because it's broad, right, we can land in kind of this area of ambiguity where we're
Hmm.
not yet totally clear. So let's keep going. To build on that, I would say that emotional intelligence is a set of skills. And this is really where we start to nail it. Okay. It is a set of skills that refer to, right, our emotionality, that connect to our emotionality. Okay. Now, when I use the word skill, what I'm implying here is that this is something that you can get better at, right? This is something that you can learn and grow, etc. And so we have to make that distinction because oftentimes when we think about these kinds of things, we can look at personality, right? Now, personality generally stays the same, right? Especially in the latter part of life over the course of our lifetimes. It can shift, but it's pretty static. As whereas skills can be developed, learned, grown, you can get better, you can even get worse. So I want for your viewers, if you're listening to this right now, I want for you to think of emotional intelligence in the same way that you would think of learning a new instrument,
Yeah.
learning how to speak a new language, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing. It's like playing basketball or keynote speaking or writing better articles, or whatever. So I can hear the skills uh, uh, idea there, but I also heard that it's more than one. It's skills. It's not a single skill. Is that correct?
Exactly. That's right. And so, and this is where we get into the measurement component, all right? And so the model that I use is called EQI 2.0. It's the world's leading model for measuring emotional intelligence. And it's made up of 15 different skills
Wow.
that fall into 5 different categories. And so there are 3 skills per category. So I have this here with me right now, for example, and I'll give you the 5 categories first. You have self perception, which is your ability to see yourself clearly. You have self expression, which is your ability to express yourself. You have interpersonal, which is your ability to build relationships.
Hmm.
You have decision making, which is self explanatory, how you go about making decisions, particularly when emotions are involved. And then you have stress tolerance. How do you deal with and manage stress day to day? And so each of those 5 categories has within it 3 different skills. So, for example, we have assertiveness as one skill that falls in the self expression composite. Okay. Now, assertiveness is a key, not just leadership, right? But it's a key life skill because it's about our ability to say what needs to be said, deliver the tough message, set a boundary, right? Say no when we need to say no, delegate, ask for help. It's kind of that mobilizing, pushing skill. And it's something that we all struggle with in some way, shape, or form. As a leader, you can't really mobilize your team if you're not able to assert. Okay. Now, it's really important when we look at this skill, there's a big difference between assertiveness and aggressiveness. And these two things often get confused. All right. Assertiveness is about your ability to share your views, perspectives, and opinions in a constructive way. So there's a positive intention and outcome that comes from it. You're being clear and you're being direct, but you're doing so in a way that maintains kind of the respect and the integrity of the interaction. Whereas aggressiveness does none of those things. It could be offensive, it could be negative, and it can deconstruct the nature of the relationship. Okay, so that's one example of one skill in a composite. Now, if we spin over to interpersonal, which was another one of the five, within interpersonal, we have empathy. Empathy is another EQ skill. Remember, there are 15, and this deals with our ability to be aware of the view and perspective of someone else. How does the world occur to that person? What are their thoughts? What are their emotions? What might they be feeling? And to not only be able to see these things or perceive these things, but to be able to use that information to help us make a more informed decision about how we might deliver a message, how we might connect, how we might support, how we might influence. All of those things now begin to come into play. And so we could look even more deeply at empathy and we could say, well, it's about our capacity to be curious, right? I know that you're big on philosophy, which is about our ability to really, ask questions, insightful questions. And so we can see this now sub skill of, let's say, being curious and asking questions, kind of being able to inform that overarching skill of empathy, which is basically my understanding of where you're at, right? In any moment in your life, when you felt deeply connected to someone, right? Like a moment of great intimacy, the hallmark of that moment is always empathy. It's feeling seen, it's feeling valued, it's feeling heard, it's feeling like you're important, it's feeling like you matter. We can't do that without that one skill. And so I just touched on two, there are 15. And so it's
Mhm.
important for us to know there isn't a single relationship issue or challenge that we face day to day, both in leadership and in life, that can't be resolved through the development and application of one of these skills.
What are your favorite, personally speaking, what are your favorite ways or foundational ways that you in your own life go back over and over again to develop your own skills of self-awareness and emotional intelligence?
Yeah, that's a really great question. The defaults for me are always about what's triggering me and why. Because when I look at a trigger of some kind, right?
Would you mind sharing one with us, perhaps?
Absolutely. It's gonna give me insight into really where I'm at. Okay. And then it allows me to kind of gauge my development and my growth over time. So I'll give you a specific example. I remember several years back, and I'm going to give one from several years back because it connects to what my experience is today. Will kind of illustrate how we can grow and develop these things over time. But I remember several years back, I was asked to participate in a program called GLTP, Global Leadership Training Program. I've been doing the program now for many years. And I was asked by the CEO of a group called CEO Global Network. His name is John Wilson. And that's a peer to peer learning organization for CEOs. CEOs helping CEOs succeed, basically. And he asked me to lead the emotional intelligence component. And I remember when that happened, I just felt this strong sense of insecurity, right? Like, I don't know that I'm capable of doing that. I don't know that I could provide value, right, to these seasoned leaders who are at the top of their organizations. And so there was this
The
fear.
imposter syndrome, it seems to me.
Yes, yes. And so I was feeling deeply this sense of imposter syndrome. And so what self-awareness allows me to do in that moment is to say, well, Jamel, what is it that you're feeling right now? Okay, well, there's some insecurity, there's self-doubt that I'm feeling, there's fear, there is stress, there is anxiety. Okay, so now I know what the emotions are. Okay, then I say, well, what stories am I telling myself that are causing me to feel these emotions? And then I begin to explore that, and I realize I'm saying things to myself like, you're not capable of bringing value at that level, right? You're not you're not in a place where you have enough expertise to teach others that have been doing what they do for such an extended period of time. And I notice these stories that are contributing to this feeling of making me feel smaller and smaller. And so as I pay attention to this, because I'm aware of it, I'm in a sense on the outside of that story looking in. I become the observer of my experience as opposed to being so consumed by it that I can't see it. It's like the trees from the forest. I can't see the forest when I'm in it. I need to be outside of the forest, right? To be able to see the array of trees. Same thing with our experience. When we're totally consumed by it, we don't even know. I wouldn't even know that I'm having that experience. I would just know that I feel this discomfort, and suddenly I make up an excuse as to why I can't do it. I'm sorry, I'm too busy, and then I move on with my life. But then in that moment, that self-awareness, it empowers me to say, Jamel, look at this reflection of your experience. Ask myself, well, what is this telling me? And is it reflective of who I want to be and how I want to show up in that moment? And so the reality there was was no. That I did not want to live into a version of myself that would make myself smaller in the face of a great opportunity. And so I was able to overcome, right, those fears and anxieties, and I was able to take that opportunity. And now today, it's pretty amazing. I can't even believe that I felt the way that I felt because I was able to grow through it and learn and deliver value, etc. And now it's one of the best things that I do in my business and in my world. And so we could also look at that and say, well, what are these emotions communicating to me? What are the values that are underpinning this emotional experience? Well, number one, value. I really pride myself on delivering an exceptional level of value. That's a good thing. I want to keep that value, right? The challenge was in the story that I was telling myself. So I was getting a negative experience of that value. And so all I need to do there, and all that I did is I changed that story. I kept the value, and this is getting a little funny with the words. I kept the value, which is value, bringing value and being of service to others. And then I changed the story on top of it, which is this is a great opportunity for me to provide a tremendous amount of value to people who are influencing many others because they're leaders of their organization. Now the emotions change, right? Now I feel excited. Now I feel this deep desire. Now I'm connecting to passion. And so think like really lay that scenario out and think about the power that comes from being able to notice what we're feeling, to derive information from it, to interpret it, and then to consciously choose how we're going to respond and who we're going to be. And so now several years later, like I said, I've grown so much and I've changed so many lives. I say really, I've supported others in changing their lives by giving them tools. Other people do it. I don't do it. but I enjoy playing that part. And so that's an example of how this skill has come to life for me. One example. This happens all the time. That was one example.
That's a wonderful example. And by the way, it reminds me very much to I used to have a meditation teacher who once told me that meditation is about giving you more space between what's happening and what you do. And within that space, you can then choose one course or one option out of several rather than simply react. You can choose, consider, and cautiously and or deliberately and cognizantly choose the better option for you. And that's because of the fact that you have that space which gives you the chance to act rather than react. It's kind of like he even said that the best definition he heard was from a little kid who once said meditation is about not punching someone on the nose.
Love
Because,
that.
when you're a little kid and some other little kid is irritating you, maybe you want to punch them. And that happens with adults too, by the way, right? But meditation, and I would say emotional intelligence and self knowledge and self awareness gives you the extra time, space, and opportunity to choose not to do that when the first most intuitive thing you may want to do is to do that, right? And then
Absolutely.
you can consider what the implications of doing that will be. And is that the person who you want to be? And is it going to bring the results that you want to bring?
Well, there's so much to what you just said there that I think is critical for us to dive a little bit more deeply in. So you're talking about making a conscious decision, right? Which is a response versus an unconscious decision, which is a reaction. And so, and mindfulness giving you this opportunity to slow things down enough for you to get back into the driver's seat and steer your experience in the way that you want to steer your experience. Now, that also implies that there's this host of behaviors and actions that we take that we're not consciously choosing. And that's a really important consideration. Like when we look at our day, we look at the way that we respond to things, right? Whether it's traffic or someone sending us an email or a report later than we were supposed to get it, or someone saying something to us that is somewhat offensive, whatever the case may be, right? There's a big portion of those responses that we engage in that we're not actually choosing. They're kind of just happening to us. And that is where emotional intelligence and self-awareness really begins to empower us, because as long as we're in the state where something external has power over the action that we take, we are disempowered. We're not leading our lives. We are not being true and authentic to ourselves. We're just repeating something based on past conditioning because it's the way that we've always done it. And maybe it's what we saw from our parents or whatever the case may be. But the moment that I could stop and pause via mindfulness, like what you just mentioned, this new opportunity arises where suddenly, right, I start to pick. And I would venture to say, we're not really living until we enter into a state where we're consciously picking our choices, our actions, the way that we show up from a set of values that's unique to us. Not something that was assigned to us, not something that we were told that we have to be or that we have to do, but something that we, through our own unique experiences and through understanding ourselves, have deemed to be important and of value for us. So there's a lot there in what you just shared.
What I love about it is that it's so much like ancient philosophy.
Hmm.
Uh, because, for example, Stoic philosophy, not just the Socratic philosophy, but Stoic philosophy, if you were to sum it all up, is about the distinction between what happens to you is different than what you do about it, and
Mhm.
how you don't have the power to control what happens, but the only thing you control is what you do about it. That's what
Exactly.
that's the very essence of Stoic philosophy.
Yes. And so there's a lot of that in exactly what I'm saying, right? Because it allows us to take our power back, right? Like one of the things that I notice when I'm having conversations with leaders from all different kinds of organizations is we seem to have misplaced our power, and we go about reclaiming it in all of these negative ways. Passive aggressiveness, inflating our own egos, beating our chest, competing against certain things, wanting to get the credit, wanting to be seen in a certain way, chasing the title for the sake of the title or the money or the accolade. We're trying to find our power somewhere out there, which inevitably only results in us feeling more and more powerless because nothing outside of you can deliver an authentic experience of power. It's always fleeting, it's always temporary, right? Like there's this momentary feeling of power. Let's say you're in this argument, right, with someone, and you finally prove that you were right and they were wrong. You have this momentary inflation, but then we somehow default back into this fear that maybe we don't know what we're talking about, and so it manifests somewhere else, right? We get the promotion, we get the title, and then there's this momentary feeling of like I'm the best, right? And I feel great about this new title, and then it's fleeting, right? We get the new car, we get the new house, and there's like this moment, and then it's fleeting, and so we've misplaced in our power, and we don't know where to find it because we're looking in the wrong place. A true experience of power is always derived from an internal state. It's a state of being, not a state of circumstances or of possessing certain things or of achieving a certain accolade. And so the moment that people start to realize that, I can make a decision to approach this from a state of empowerment. I can recognize my own values and make choices that are in alignment with values, right? I can learn how to see myself as valuable and worthy. I can place value on myself, my own strengths and abilities and internal resources. So I'm not chasing that externalized value and recognition on the outside. Suddenly we can relax in our being a little bit more. The challenge that we face when we begin that process is that we have to see the reality of who we are now. And there's some pain that's involved in that, like what I mentioned earlier, right? The insecurity. I had to come to the recognition that I'm an insecure person, and these insecurities cause me to do these things, which then negatively affect other people. And that recognition is tough. I have to hold the weight of who I am completely myself without blaming, because the moment that I blame, my power is gone again. It's out there again. So
You
I've got to
become a
take it on.
victim rather than an agent. Yeah.
That's right. I've got to become it within myself. And that's where we start to feel a sense of empowerment, and that's really the place where we become powerful as leaders because we're not so externally dependent on some of these shallow things anymore.
Yeah, for me, it's never been about recognition, but been about not punching someone in the nose. Because for me, it's always been about this kind of self control thing. It's like, okay, I'm kind of explosive and expressive and emotional, and it's like I have these urges, emotional urges, and they're usually super counterproductive, super unhelpful, super damaging. So it's all about that. I've learned in my case, uh, controlling and not let the monster out. Don't, feed the monster. Feed the relaxed, person who is able to accept whatever's coming their way and choose from a position of freedom and a diversity of options what's the best course of action given the situation. I mean, Epictetus says that that's the major distinction we all have to make in our life: the distinction between the things that are outside of our control and the things that are within our control. And he says you shouldn't waste any time, money, or effort whatsoever on things that are outside of our control. And that's why one of the best examples was, I remember, I forget whether if it was during the reign of Nero or Caligula. One of the leading Stoics was called in front of the emperor and was told, don't show up to the Senate hearing, because if you show up, I'm going to have to kill you. If you say something, I'm going to have to kill you. And he said, and his answer was, you do what you do, and I do what I do. You can kill me, but you can't hurt me.
Wow.
And of course, he was put to death later on because but that's the distinction between, other people I cannot control. We cannot control what other people do or say. The only thing we can choose and control is how we respond. And so, for example, if you see injustice, or if you see something that's wrong, and your values are, and your calling in life is that you have to say something and you have to fight that, then you have to also recognize the fact there is a price to be paid for it. And that's just one of many examples. But let me ask you this: bring this more kind of realistic to daily people's lives, because we don't have to talk to emperors and stuff. But people would often say, I'm fine. It's not me. It is them. It's my boss. It's my ex wife. It's my colleagues. All of them, they lack emotional intelligence. So, first of all, how do we know if that is true? And secondly, in those super rare, I imagine, super rare cases when that's actually true, what can we do about it?
Okay.
Or what should we do
So,
about it?
one of the hallmarks of an emotionally intelligent process is the ability to tell ourselves the truth. And so if I were speaking to someone who said that, it's not me, it's my boss, it's my I would ask, well, what's the lowest common denominator with all of those people? Right? The lowest common denominator is you. And so do you truly believe that the rest of the world, that everybody else is stupid and you're the only intelligent person on the planet? Is that legitimately what you believe? And we would have this conversation where we're challenging this fundamental belief to figure out what's happening. And so typically when we have an ideal like that, well, everybody else is stupid and I'm the only intelligent one. Well, we could go a level deeper than that, right? Well, what are some of the emotions that are associated with living in a world where everybody else is an idiot? Anger, frustration, annoyance. That would be the hallmark of your experience. So then we ask,
Righteousness?
sorry,
Righteousness?
righteousness, absolutely, right?
Yeah.
So then we ask, well, if we look at the course of your day, how much of your time are you spending in those emotional states? And again, it comes back to honesty and truth. And if we're being honest, then that person would say a good portion of my day because people just keep doing stupid things or whatever the case may be. Okay. And so then we would say, well, your state of being, right, is a negative state of being because it's composed of all of these negative emotions. And by negative, I don't mean bad. There's still value in understanding what these emotions are saying, right? And so we would then take that angle to figure out, well, what is that anger really about?
How is
Is it
that working for you?
exactly, right? How is that working for you? How are you showing up as a result of your anger? In what areas are you creating friction because of your anger? In what ways are you not able to perform, to connect, to deliver on what you need to deliver on in leadership and life because of your anger? And we recognize it's your anger. It's not the world's anger. It's not everybody else's anger. And so the more that we can then claim that and begin to understand the anger and what is it there to tell us and process the anger, well, suddenly we're not seeing the world through the lens of our anger. And when we're no longer seeing the world through the lens of our anger, there's that tint isn't there. We start to see things more clearly and we start to see things more objectively. And that's kind of the process. Now, I believe the second part of your question was about where how do we start that or where do we go? If you could refresh me on that.
Yeah, the second part is like, in some cases, rare as they may be, we might be dealing with someone with very low emotional intelligence who
Yeah.
is in control of our professional career, of our professional future, who is our boss, who is our colleague, who is someone we are dependent on, who is our cousin or parent or wife, partner, what have you. How do we deal with them in that situation, rare as it might be? Because yes, we should take responsibility and we should try to improve and fix ourselves, but sometimes you would deal with people who are not emotionally developed and have very low emotional intelligence themselves. How do we deal with those people?
The question there goes back to what you said around what we can control and what we can't control. Ultimately, we can't control others and their decisions. We can sometimes influence those decisions, but we have to be careful not to assume responsibility of the active choices that other people are making through the autonomy of their own free will. So we first have to make that distinction. Once we make that distinction, then we can ask a far more important and fundamental question, which is, how am I relating to this individual or this person or this situation? And is there something that I need to change about the way that I'm relating to this particular scenario? For example, let's say that I have an abusive boss who is doesn't recognize my work, who is overly critical and who insults me in certain ways, either directly or indirectly, aggressively or passively, when I make a mistake. Who am I going to be in that moment? Am I going to be the person who just passively complies? Am I going to laugh at a joke that they make about me that's hurtful, which means that I've abandoned myself in a sense and my values? I become a shell of myself, right? Am I going to act like it's okay when really it's not? Or am I going to make a different choice? Am I going to say, "Hey John, I know that that's a joke, but I just want to let you know that it's not okay by me. So I'd prefer if you didn't make jokes like that." That's an EQ skill. That's some degree of assertiveness, some degree of emotional expression, some degree of self regard, which is self confidence. For me to step up and say that, it means that I value myself. So there's confidence and self regard there. And so the first thing that you have to ask is, how am I relating to this situation? And is there something that I need to do here that I'm not doing? So that's one thing. Now, let's take a different angle on the same situation. We can also ask, have I provided feedback? And that's a difficult thing, right? Like a lot of us struggle with providing outward feedback, but it's important that people have some idea of how they're coming across. Otherwise, they have no opportunity to be able to change. And so it's our responsibility to be able to share, right, that feedback with that person in obviously a very respectful and professional way. And then it's up to that person to choose whether or not they make the adjustment. If they're not willing to make the adjustment, well, now the choice defaults back to me. Do I want to continue to be in a place where I'm exposing myself to negative and toxic behaviors? And if the answer to that is yes, then the question becomes, how much do I really value my own life and my own experience? Why don't I value my life more to believe that I deserve better than that? If the answer is yes, then we go out and we find another opportunity at a culture that's more in alignment with who we are and what we want to experience and what we believe that we deserve. And so it's so easy to overlook the me component in the problems that we face. And acknowledging that there's a me component in there somewhere doesn't mean that we're relinquishing others of their responsibility as well. And it doesn't mean that we're accepting those things. It just means that we're making a decision to not be a victim to a situation and to find our power internally and then to take the most appropriate action to create the most appropriate outcome.
What about those situations where, uh, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there is a common presumption shared among certain leaders,
Mm,
especially hardcore business leaders who measure things on the bottom line, on usually at the bottom of a spreadsheet.
yeah.
And I think they feel that emotional intelligence is way too softy of a skill. It will make them way too emotional to be able to have the guts to make the hard decisions of running a business with 10 or 20 or 30,000 employees or what have you, and might even make them irrational because they'll be so emotional that they'll be irrational. What about those fears
All
or
the things
presumptions?
all the things that you're describing are problems that result from a lack of emotional intelligence. So you just said Oh, it's so soft. What about, having the tough conversation? Assertiveness. That's emotional intelligence. I can't tell you the number of leaders that I speak with and that I support and that I coach where we are working on exiting the wrong person from an organization. And because they don't have the assertiveness, they settle with not only mediocre performance or poor performance, but they actually settle with people who are negative and who
Damaging.
are
Yeah.
creating a horrible work environment. And because they have no assertiveness, because they don't have the independence, which is another EQ skill, because they don't have the self regard, they allow this to happen and it ravishes the organization in a way that I can't even begin to describe. Right. And so the other thing that you said is, well, what if it makes us irrational? Okay. Well, like I said, there isn't a single relationship challenge that you cannot solve by using one of those 15 skills. One of those 15 skills is reality testing. Reality testing is about our ability to see and distinguish the difference between what we are feeling emotionally and what is externally objectively true. It's about our ability to actually remove our emotions from the situation. And so if I'm behaving irrationally or emotionally, I need emotional intelligence, specifically reality testing, to be able to correct that. So this is what I mean when I say what the real problem that we face is that we don't actually know what emotional intelligence is. And we believe that the problems that we're facing don't have anything to do with emotional intelligence. But when I sit down and I have the conversation with these executive leaders, CEOs, whoever they may be, lawyers, whoever they may be, I don't even talk about emotional intelligence first. I just say, tell me about your challenges. Tell me about what you're facing. And the first 50 minutes, I'm not over exaggerating, of a 60-minute debrief process is just about understanding. As soon as I have the full context of their entire world, I say, this is this skill, this is this skill, this is the lack of this skill, this is the application of that skill. They go, oh my goodness, I had no idea. So emotional intelligence is happening around us every day, all the time. The question is not whether or not it's happening. The question is not whether or not we have emotions or whether or not we're bringing emotions to work. The question is, are you able to see it? And do you manage it in a skilled way? Or do you manage it without skill?
Are you in charge of your emotions, or are they in charge of you, basically?
Bang on. That's exactly right.
Right. So, and what you said in the first part, that actually it's not so soft because it teaches you assertiveness and reality checking and all those things. It reminded me, actually, when I did martial arts, there was a saying that the soft is hard and the hard is soft.
Yeah, I love that. I
And
love that.
that reminded me about that, the fact that it looks or is presumed that it's a soft skill, but actually it's not. It's a hard skill. It's hard to acquire, it's hard to practice, it's hard to implement, it's hard at every level. That's why we are afraid and we run away from it. And that's why the hard ones are soft and the soft ones are hard, usually, right?
That's right.
And that's
Very well said.
particularly true perhaps about great leaders. The really hard ones are are kind of soft, and they may avoid emotional conversations and often lack those skills, whereas the soft ones that are skilled at those parts are actually harder leaders, and they're able to accomplish, like, better results. uh, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think that what you're exploring here is important, right? Because you're talking about this kind of distinction between soft and hard. And typically when we think about emotions at work, we immediately go to the soft, right? We go to the empathy, the interpersonal relationships, the understanding someone else's view and perspective, the exploration of emotions. But we forget that it's actually a spectrum. And in that spectrum, you have both soft and hard. Assertiveness, hard, right? Independence, hard. Reality testing, hard. It's a range. And so when we get blindsided to just, oh, emotional intelligence is just this one thing, right? That's where we create the blind spots to not recognizing it's more than just that. And to your point, those things aren't soft anyway. They're actually quite difficult things to do. because of the negative relationship that we have to our own emotions and the emotions of others, to things like conflict, etc., etc. So that's a really great point.
Jamel, this is a fascinating and wonderful conversation, but I want to start transitioning it towards technology in general and AI in particular. So, the first kind of, if you will, half or two-thirds of our conversation was intended kind of to guide us through the foundations of emotional intelligence. And then now let's see how it works in the context of technology in general and AI in particular. So, let's start with this. What do you think is the particular effect of technology in general and AI in particular on people's emotional intelligence nowadays, as whether as individuals or as a society at large?
Yes, very good question. So, at the most simple level, AI represents change. It represents many things, but at a very fundamental, it represents change. But not just any change, an exponential change that we can't fully grasp with the human mind. The human mind always has difficulty with things that are exponential. And so, whenever we're dealing with exponential change, let's say in the areas of technology, and in my world, that's in business and how we do business and our ability to make business more efficient, right? It means that we need to then adapt to all of these new implementations that are coming in. It also means that there's going to be a lot more unknown, and that this space of unknown is going to become more characteristic of our world as the implementation and deployment and integration of AI continues to accelerate. So, the thing that we're not talking about is the emotional demands that come with an exceptional level, an unprecedented level of change in an exceptionally short period of time. There's an emotional disruption there that's going to happen because now instead of doing it this way, I got to do it this way. Now something that worked for 30 years is not working. I need to now reinvent a new process, a new way, a new approach. Now these roles that we've had within our organization that have been pillar roles are essentially obsolete because we have this tool and this resource that we can use to do those roles instead.
You kind of jumped right into the deep end here, and I want to back up a little bit because let me see if I can rephrase it. Because my question was a little bit more about the individual and society in general, and let me give you a specific observation, and you can correct it maybe from your knowledge and expertise. So my impression is that technology in general uh, diminishes uh, emotional intelligence. And what I mean by that is the following specific observation, and that's my bias subjective perception of it. So you see, I have two nieces and a nephew, and my nephew is 11, 12 almost. One of my nieces is 9, and the other one is 6. And they are not allowed to have cell phones. They have very limited time doing a lot of technology. They're super active kids. They do circus. My nephew is almost like a professional level swimmer. He swims 2 hours every single day, 7 days a week, sometimes twice per day. And then he competes and all of that. And when I take pictures in my free time, it's one of my hobbies. I take pictures at his birthday party or at his competitions. And what strikes me while taking these pictures is that many of their peers, whether at 10 to 12 or 8 to 10 or 5 to 6, don't have basic emotional intelligence skills. So, for example, my nieces and nephews are very well versed. They speak very well for their age. They look you straight in the eye. They pay attention to you when you're speaking to them. They're very respectful. They don't feel awkward. They know how to behave because they're very active in circus, in sports, and all those things. Whereas their peers are constantly on their phones. And this, I may sound like an old dinosaur here saying this, but they don't know how to look you in the eye when you're an adult. They don't know how to hold a conversation. They can't stay focused while you're saying a sentence or two. They can't even look you when they're talking to you, and all of those things. And so my perception, biased and skewed as it may be, is that because my nieces and nephews have less of an exposure to that cell phone, they're not on social media, any of that stuff, they have had a lot more opportunity, given their outside activities like sports and circus and stuff. They have had opportunity to cultivate and develop emotional intelligence, whereas many of their peers, unfortunately, it seems to me, young kids nowadays really struggle with that, really struggle. And that's also in terms of confidence, as you said, because my nephew, you know swims and does all the things, even though he's very, very short for his age, very short, tiny boy, literally the shortest one. He swims against people his age who are almost double his size, and he sometimes wins against them, right? But that gives him confidence and all of that. So I'll stop now, and you tell me, is this observation wrong? Is there anything to it? What's your professional opinion on this? Is it the case that that massive usage of technology like cell phones and social media at a young age diminishes the emotional intelligence of our young people?
I think that I'll go at it from this angle. I believe that technology is, in some sense, the smoking of our generation. What do I mean by that? Well, for a very long time, we smoked openly and publicly, and we enjoyed it. There were even some campaigns in the 60s that would say that smoking is good for you and that it's healthy for you, right? And then it wasn't until much later when the science and the research caught up to us that we realized that smoking is a carcinogen and it causes
Julie's grandma, for
cancer.
example, Julie's grandma was prescribed to smoke cigarettes because she gained weight when she got pregnant with Julie's mom, and her doctor prescribed her to smoke cigarettes to lose the weight.
Exactly, right? And so, think about that world. So we look at that now, we say that's crazy. And so I believe that over the course of the next, 5 to 10 years, hopefully sooner, we're going to be doing the same thing with technology because we will have understood how it impacts the development of the brain and social skills and our ability to be able to connect, particularly in youth and in children where these skills and these abilities, these social skills, they're so nuanced, are just being developed for the very first time. And so to kind of redirect that into technology, I think that we're going to see the implications of that later on. And we're going to recognize, oh my goodness, we were crazy to give our children this kind of technology because it stifled them in these ways. So to answer your question, I believe that the answer is yes, to some extent. I believe that we don't handle technology as responsibly as we should, particularly when it comes to children, because we don't understand the implications of what it means and how it's impacting the ability to be able to develop certain fundamental emotional skills. In fact, we're starting to recognize this now, and I believe that they've actually recently mandated in Peel no cell phones in schools because it was just getting totally out of control. So I imagine and I hope we'll start to take more of these steps as we move into the future. And then at some point in the future, it will also become, you know, it would become as crazy as giving a child a cigarette. And so we'll learn with time, right, what those structures, what those limitations, what those boundaries need to be in the way that we deal with technology. But it will come after we see the effects of having managed that so poorly for such a long period of time.
Hmm. And let me bring here now AI, because and see how it fits in this conversation, because maybe AI, and there may be some early evidence. I want to see if you're familiar with any of it, but there may be some early evidence that AI can possibly be used as a tool to help people cultivate emotional intelligence. For example, could apps or AI driven coaching provide people meaningful feedback on self awareness and empathy. There was this research that I came across a few months ago about these doctors that were following this AI process, AI driven process, and they were compared to doctors who weren't. And it turns out that doctors who followed the AI guiding process were more empathetic according to the patients that they were interacting with. So it seems that in this case, if you are a doctor using AI versus a doctor who was not using AI, the AI helped doctors were more empathetic rather than less.
Mhm.
Now I'm thinking about you as a coach, executive coach. I mean, I don't know how possible that is. You tell me, what do you think? But do you think that we can create a Jamelle Lindo AI agent that can go and train your clients on emotional intelligence, for example, that can guide your training sessions and stuff like that? Could we take that trend, which may have some damaging effects on our youth right now, and reverse it with the help of AI and the knowledge from experts like you?
Okay. So this is going to be an unpopular answer, and it's an answer that even I don't really like. But ultimately, on a long enough time horizon, yes. On a long enough time horizon, at some point, yes. When? I have no idea. I've already seen some pretty shocking agents in terms of their ability to do certain things. There have been cases and scenarios where people are using ChatGPT to solve certain challenges, and ChatGPT will respond in acknowledgement of the emotional state that the person was in when they were prompting for certain answers, and will make recommendations. And so I think on a long enough time horizon, yes. What we don't know is how comfortable people are going to be and when that comfort will shift. And what I mean by that is when someone will be comfortable enough with an AI to have these very human and intimate type relationships and conversations, and feel the same way that they would with a human. I can't tell you when and if that is going to happen. Now, even
I
if we
would
do,
say that has happened 60 years ago, my friend. We had the first examples of a chatbot, I think, in the 60s, and I think, if I remember, the name was Eliza. And the designer of that chatbot in the 60s was shocked about the perception that people would have of Eliza, and the kinds of details that they were willing and wanting and being comfortable with sharing with them, right? And that was 60 years ago.
yes, and so we still have, though, many problems to solve. We have to solve the problem of robotics, number one. I think the software is coming along really nicely, but for people to feel, right, like they're having an interaction with another human being, right? Physicality is going to be a component to that. And so we also have to look at robotics, and at what point will that experience be indistinguishable from an actual human experience? And are people going to be willing still to substitute that completely? So there's that aspect of it. The other aspect that you've got to look at is the nuance of specific experiences of a human being over the course of time, and when an AI will be able to replicate that. So your question is about how do we replace Jamelle Lindo as an emotional intelligence coach? I think that's we're trying to put me out of a job here, but let's kind of have the discussion. And so the number of leaders that I've had conversations with, the certain nuances, the way in which I'm building relationships, the physicality of you being able to actually meet me and shake my hand, the emotion that we experience if we're in a room together, though I do a lot virtually today, but if we're in a room together, the cathartic experience of you processing something emotionally, or having a breakthrough, or having an insight, like those are things that at this moment cannot be replicated. And so your question is over a long enough time horizon. Well, I think that if we just continue developing in the way that we're developing, eventually at some point in the future, provided we're not interrupted, it will be similar, if not exactly the same.
Let me push back a little bit here, my friend. So there's already a number of programs and software apps, if you will, which connect, let's say, youth at risk or children or teenagers with suicidal ideation or other issues, and let's say um, psychotherapy or psychiatrists, psychologists, and people of all kinds of training, and do that. They do that kind of connection virtually, not physically, over the app or over Zoom, not just during the pandemic, but for convenience and for all kinds of reasons before and even, and of course, especially after. So I don't feel necessarily convinced. I can see your point about the robotics, but in terms of like the timeline in the very long run, as you say, things are going so fast nowadays that the very long run is like a few years. uh
Yes.
but that's not one thing, but the second is like I'm not convinced we necessarily, and maybe I'm wrong about this, feel free to correct with your opinion, but the physicality may or may not be required. So we might be able to do it just like the character in Her did it, you know, with an AI that's not necessarily physically present but more of a virtual present. And yeah, I'm just thinking about the fact that you said that emotional intelligence is about recognizing and managing your emotions and those of others. Well, I'm thinking, my watch knows my pulse, my blood pressure. The camera can see the dilation of my pupil. They know my rate of respiration. All of those physical measurements that can be symptoms of my emotional state, and they can see those and perceive them much better than any other human being. They can analyze them for a millisecond, and therefore they can recognize my emotional state or our emotional state of any human much faster potentially than any other human, however experienced they might be. And then the next step, so the first part is the recognition. So I think the machines would already have us beat, either currently or very short soon to have us
Hmm.
fully beat. And
Hmm.
then the only edge of the human would be at the managing end, if you will, or the guiding. But I think that can also come up not too long from now. And the only slowest part, I think, will be if you happen to be correct that we definitely need a physical embodiment in a robotics kind of a humanoid shape. That can delay things, but I'm not convinced it's a must. I might be wrong. So what do you feel about that kind of a pushback from a technologist point of view, as someone who has studied those trends for a while?
There's a few things to acknowledge. So first off, you're correct in that, and this might also be a little strange for me to say, but in certain areas, AI will be far more emotionally intelligent than humans. Um, it because I have seen the software of recognition, and what's happening is AI is actually able to read micro expressions that most human beings miss. And then we also have to realize that the data set that they're going to be dealing with is essentially all data of all time, right? Like these are going to be machines that have access to all of the internet for all
Not
time.
just Jamelle Lindo, but all your colleagues, all your teachers, all your mentors, all your competitors, everyone.
Correct. Correct. And so to that point, yes, that will happen, and it largely is happening already now. And we see that with bot, interactions and language, and we're at the beginning phases of getting a physicality component to that as well, because there's also a ton of AI that's able to replicate with a great deal of accuracy human likeness. And so I could be an AI right now talking, and some people may not be able to recognize that, and then we have to recognize that this is getting exponentially better. So to your point around, can this be substituted, right, virtually, an experience of emotional intelligence coaching and training? The answer is yes. The answer is yes. I think the next question that comes from that is, okay, but then Jamel, what happens to you, right? Like, does that mean that you are on a permanent vacation or out of a job, or all of those kinds of things? And that's where I think it gets a little bit more tricky because we're dealing with the nuance now of human, I guess you could say, preference. And so, what is going to be what is going to be a higher value in the marketplace? I don't have an answer for this, but it's something we need to think about. Is the higher value going to be in knowing that you're actually communicating with a live human being? Are we going to place value on that piece? And is it going to be the same value in knowing that you're communicating with something that's effective, but something that is not human? Now, many people say, well, at a certain point, no one's going to care whether it's real or it's not real. And I think that that piece is up for debate. Then you go one step further and you say, okay, now there's this whole other element that's still a part of professional development that is in person. There's the catharticness of being in the room with someone, feeling something, sharing experiences, actually having communal learning experiences with other human beings and going through that process. And to what extent do we believe that something like that can be automated? So what I believe is going to be happening in the near future is we're going to see a kind of hybridization in leadership development where you do have bots that are executive coaches that can train you on certain processes, that can support you in some of the areas that I've even described here. But then there's also going to be this kind of a premium human element that stands apart from interacting with an AI. And I think that that human component is going to be at a premium because Jamelle Lindo as a human being can't be scaled infinitely like the bot can be scaled infinitely. And I don't know, right? We'll have to see what the market does with this. But I believe that as AI becomes more scalable and more accessible, and essentially at some point everybody will have the best possible EQ coach in the world on their handheld, that having an opportunity to get into a room with another human being who's exceptionally gifted and talented in a particular area now becomes a different value proposition in the marketplace that I believe as human beings we will overvalue. Now, is that a fact? Right? It's not a fact. But we have to remember that just because we're dealing with AI machines that are exceptionally advanced and human-like in many cases, oftentimes, sometimes even more human in the way that they interact with us, it doesn't totally remove that kind of natural, inherent need for physical touch, for physical connection, for real eye contact. I don't believe that component evaporates. Like, let's take another example. We know that infants need to be connected when they're born immediately with their mothers. There's something biological that's happening there that is the result of many many years of evolution and the exchange of things between the mother and the infant. That is not a mechanized process, and we are conditioned, right, and programmed to want that. And so I don't believe that AI can replace that kind of biological need that we have. And so that again is up for debate, but I see that human element as becoming even more valuable. Now let's 1 second. I know you've got a lot of thoughts on this, but let's consider. We know, based on the way that things are going, that some of the themes in her will become realities in short time. Things like an AI girlfriend, AI boyfriend, AI partner, AI best friend. Those things are going to be happening.
They're happening already.
Exactly. Now, as good as that AI experience is going to be, does it replace what happens biologically when we're sharing space with
Those
a
people
potential
say
partner?
it's not just replacing it, it's better.
How is it better biologically? How does it replace the fundamental the rhythm of my biology interfacing with your biology when we're sharing physical space? How does it
I,
become
I
better than
watched some guy in Japan who married a bot.
that?
And Japan has this kind of a trend about lots of young people who are lonely and who are unable to connect with each other and talk about lack of emotional intelligence and not being sort of able to recognize and manage your emotions. I mean, some cultures may be really disincentivizing you to improve on that, it seems. And I don't want to blame the Japanese culture, but I can see how that could be a lot more challenging there. So there's this huge trend of many lonely people of both sexes, by the way. It's a tragedy.
Yeah.
Birth rate is super low in Japan and things like that. And so this guy married a bot. And that happened like, I don't know, a year ago or something, maybe 2 years ago. And for him, it's better because you don't have to fight with another human being. It's like based on his previous experiences with any other possible previous girlfriends, he said everything is better. So,
Okay.
from my point of view, I agree with you as from where I stand. But I'm blessed with a very healthy, beautiful relationship. Talk about the physicality. Last night at 3 o'clock, my wife was cuddling me. Okay, and that to me was bliss, literally happiness, bliss. I was like, oh
Yeah.
my god, this is like the definition. And we've been together for 21 years, and I'm like looking at my watch, it's 3 o'clock in the morning,
Yep.
right? And I'm like, I'd be awake on any 3 o'clock in the morning to get a cuddle from my wife. And it's like the happiest thing in my life, and it's wonderful, and it's exactly what you're saying. But that person maybe never had such an experience, maybe didn't value it, I don't know, but for them everything was better with the bot.
Well, you got to define better, right? Like, is it better because we don't argue? Is it better because I'm not being challenged? Is it better because you're just going to agree with everything that I say? Is it better because I don't have to grow as a human being and I can stay just as I am, just as lazy, just as disgusting, and you're never going to have a problem with it? So it's better for those reasons. So I would have to question, what do we mean when we say better? And I think that the deeper thing that we have to look at here is, what does it really mean to be human?
Exactly.
Is the human existence fundamentally about everything being easy and someone that's just going to bend to my nature no matter what? Or is part of what it means to be human to struggle, to challenge each other, right? To grow with one another, to learn about insecurities and to process those insecurities and to be seen and to exercise vulnerability and intimacy. Like, is that it? And I think that one of the things that we're going to hit is kind of this crisis where we have to redefine and reevaluate, well, what does it really mean to be human? And what do we want out of this human experience? And different people are going to have different answers, because there is going to be that person who says, I just want the AI bot who's going to do what I say, who's going to agree with me all the time, and I'm happy with that. But then you're going to get other people who are going to have that experience and are going to feel that there's something missing, there's something lacking. And maybe we're not able to put our finger on it, but I want something more, right? I want
Yeah,
something deeper.
I
And
can even
so
put my finger on it. My wife can not just cuddle me, she can also kick my ass like no one else can, and motivate me, whether with the stick, whether with the carrot, in one way or another, to become a better version of myself. And
that's it.
that's one thing that I absolutely love and appreciate and I'm grateful for. And that's why 21 years later, I'm very far from perfect or even pleasant. I don't even know how she does it, honestly, but I
Mhm.
know that I am better today, 21 years later, for meeting her and for living with her for 21 years than I would have ever been and that I ever was before. And
That's
I
exactly
appreciate
it.
that.
That's exactly it. Now, you also know that she's going to watch this podcast, so you better not say that you want the bot who's just going to agree with you, right? And so, look, we have to start to look at biology, right? And what it means fundamentally to be human, right? Eh, Having children, the experience of giving birth, right, to another living form, right? How is AI cannot replicate what that means? Like, I'm not a parent, not yet. I plan to be, but not yet. And whenever I speak to someone who has witnessed the birth of their child, like, that experience is unparalleled by anything else. The emotion, the passion, the love, right? There's a real palpable energy and experience there. And it comes from our fundamentally biological nature. And so, what I'm saying is, I think AI is going to be exceptional in ways that we can't even imagine, right?
You
But I
know,
don't
many
think it could replace the biological need of a human being.
some entrepreneurs uh, look at their companies or their startups as their children. Hans Moravec, who is a very notable scientist in the AI community, I think actually he passed away just a few years ago. But anyway, he wrote a book, and maybe the title of the book itself was uh, Our Mind Children, referring to the AI. So a lot of people would transmute their kind of biological imperative to give birth to a physical or biological offspring by giving birth to an intellectual or corporate offspring. Uh, so maybe that's one way of dealing with those biological urges, and we know humans are able to redirect their biological urges, whether in art or in science or what have you. We have many examples of that. So I don't know. This is an open question, but I agree with you completely that it comes down to the question about what does it mean to be human. That's kind of the inception of my blog and my podcast 15 years ago. What does it mean to be human, and how does technology in general and AI in particular change both the answer and the very question? What does it
Yes.
mean to be human?
Yes.
Because all of those things are already up for grabs.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And we need to start taking that question much more seriously because there's a good chance that we will succeed with AI and that a big part of our lives will become automated and things will become much easier and that those resources will become much cheaper, especially on a long enough time horizon. And so we've got to revisit that and say, what do we really want as human beings out of life now that we're not plagued by this need for survival?
Let me ask you another question with respect to AI here, and that kind of connects to the most common fear, of course, is that people are going to be replaced by AI, first professionally, and then maybe even biologically. So, how, from the point of view of an emotional intelligence expert, how do we deal, or how would you help people to deal with their fear of being replaced professionally, let alone in the longer run? A lot of people are raising the question of, uh, AI replacing us entirely biologically, and how we're like the dinosaurs on our way of going extinct and all of those things.
Okay. And so the first thing is AI, this fear around AI taking my job, right? Like that's the big thing. Is AI going to take my job? Is AI going to take my job? What we're seeing instead, and there are some cases, especially with things that are very repetitive, where that will be the case for some. What we're seeing more is this idea of augmentation, where a human is still involved, but they're augmented by what AI can do. And so we really have to change our mindset instead of only thinking about replacement to also thinking about augmentation. Now, what does augmentation mean? Well, it means that we're still fundamentally working off our own individual skill set and ability, but now we have access to essentially a super intelligence that we can leverage in our decision making. And so the judgment component will likely still land on the responsibility as a responsibility for the human being, but our access to information, our access to different probabilities and possibilities is done through the machines. And we're actually seeing this now, right? We're seeing the beginning of these kind of collaborative relationships between humans and AI in the medical fields. Now, a lot of AI is actually doing a better job of diagnosing certain things than a doctor, and so the doctor will use this technology to help inform their decision making, but still ultimately will will hold the judgment of that decision and the implementation of whatever the solution is. We see the same thing in law, right? No single lawyer can know every single case that has happened in all of time and all of the specific nuances of each of those cases, the legal nuances, etc. A lawyer will just not be able to compete with that. But a lawyer can use that in their decision making for how they go about litigation, how they show up in court, what arguments they then decide to create. And so we're likely headed toward instead a world of augmentation instead of replacement. Even in the scenario where your role or your job is replaced by AI, it's likely going to be replaced by another human using AI as opposed to just AI by itself. Now, we have to account for the fact that there are agents that are now starting to hit the market that can do everything from point A to point B. But for now, right, there's still a programming phase, there's still a human element behind the agent. For how long that will be the case? Well, we don't know, right? This is where we now get into the conversation of AIs that are able to write their own code and learn independently from human beings. And I think once we get there, we're dealing with an entirely new world. None of the rules from the past apply. And so I can't give any answers in terms of what that's going to look like.
Yeah, and I'm just concerned, if you have, so the Great Depression only involved like 20 or 25% worth of unemployment rate.
Hmm.
I forget if it was 20 or 25%, but it was somewhere there, a fifth to a quarter of the work age population being unable to find a job, and that was the Great Depression.
Hmm.
But I'm thinking, there's like 5 million truck drivers and other people who make a living just in the United States by driving a vehicle for a living. Those
Yes.
people would be gone.
Hmm.
Then there's all the cashiers,
Hmm.
something like another 2 million in the United States. So that's 6 million already. And then
Yeah.
when you start piling up things like that, that are possibly going to happen, not
Yes.
not even including any of the blue collar jobs, I mean of the white collar jobs, middle level management, even upper level management, where an AI would possibly be able to take better decisions and you don't need the physicality of a CEO and all of that stuff. And
Hmm.
I don't know, as you say, I don't know when it will happen, but I see the spread of possibility from next year to the next 50 years. I don't know, but it's a big spread, but it could happen much sooner than expected, given the fact that we live in a world of accelerating change. So
Absolutely.
like, yeah, the hybridization I think is a bit older of a trend, and now we're like more of in the new world where AI is just getting so much better, so much faster. It's crazy.
Yes, it is. It is.
Let me move on because I know time is advancing here, and you're so generous in sharing your time with us here today. But I appreciate your time, and I think there may be a lot of rich rewards actually for people listening to our conversation, or at least I've learned a lot from you already, and I
Thank
hope
you.
others will. So, if you were to give just one lesson about emotional intelligence to everyone, what would that be? One free lesson that we would be very grateful for.
The one lesson that I would give, I've actually already mentioned. It's the most powerful, which is expanding our emotional literacy. And all that means is taking some time every day to reflect on something that you felt strongly about. It can be a moment of trigger, it could just be something that you felt strongly about, and literally write out all of the emotions associated with that experience. And you can Google an emotion wheel or an emotion chart to give you all of the different words. But just starting with that process over the course of 7 days or 30 days, if practiced diligently, will be life changing for you. Because through that experience, through that exercise, you're going to start to notice kind of your emotional geography, where you spend the majority of your time emotionally. And the insights that you're going to derive from that will, I guarantee, be very useful and valuable for you in terms of next steps.
Wonderful. Is there a question that I should have asked you today, but I didn't? We've had
That's
a
and
long conversation. Now it's well over 1 hour 45 minutes.
I don't think so. I think the one thing maybe that you could ask is, what is it that makes for a successful EQ development journey? And I know that we're short on time, but I'll make it really, really quick, and I'll say the number one
Please.
thing is your attitude. And it's an attitude of prioritizing, right? Your own mental and emotional state. It's an attitude of seeing it as important, as seeing it as valuable, and in recognizing that the emotional state that you're in truly matters as the foundational building block of your life. And with that mindset, it then prepares you to enter into some of the other processes and strategies that we talked about. But it starts with really prioritizing this and seeing it as important for you.
Wonderful. It starts with the mindset. Jamel, where can people find more about you and your work?
Just go to my website. Everything is on there. JamelleLindo.com. That's JamelleLindo.com. There's also a free 30-day self-awareness reflection journal that you could download to begin the journey yourself. And that's a complimentary download. But so many people ask me about where to begin. That's where you begin. And you will be happy that you did.
Well, I'm very happy to have had you here today on my podcast. What's the final message you want to send us away with? If we were to take just one message from you to kind of carry later on in our daily lives or in any direction that you think is most valuable, what's the one message you want to send us off with?
I would reiterate the importance of your emotion. Your emotion matters. And I would encourage you to, instead of avoiding emotion, to lean in and to find and harness the power of emotion to help you create a better experience, not just in leadership, but in life.
Jamelle Lindo, thank you very much for being with us here today.
Thank you for having me, Nick. It was a pleasure.